All right, this is Brian Tier coming to you from Landmark Missionary Baptist Church, where I am the adult Sunday school teacher. Wanted to bring you a quick lesson here from Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20, a little bit off the beaten path, so to speak. I just noticed a day or two ago when I began my studies for this week that I had skipped this chapter, and I didn't mean to. I think I went through chapter 19 in our lesson. And so this is going to be I'm going to call this lesson 7B. All right, this is kind of a supplemental to our other lesson that we had on leadership that we've been talking about with the children of Israel. We were talking about, if you remember correctly from last week, we were talking about the children of Israel and how they questioned Aaron's leadership, questioned Moses' leadership to the point that God had Aaron and all of the leaders lay out their rods and to show who was the one that was chosen by God. And of course, it was Aaron. His was the rod that had budded. And then we got into chapter 18 talking about all of the things that the priests were going to be responsible for, and also how that they would be killed if they weren't doing the right thing, and also the reward for being in that leadership position. Chapter 20 kind of goes into the same thing, continues on talking about this, and so I thought it was necessary to at least bring this out. And there's a couple of things that I want to, and our lesson number 8 is very lengthy, very long as far as the amount of passages that we're covering anyway. So I figured I better go ahead and set this one as a little bit of a shorter lesson, just a quick lesson for you here from this chapter, because I think it's a very important one that we need to see and understand how God deals with leadership and his expectations of them as well. Okay, and remember chapter 19 dealt with the red heifer offering and the purification as well. So chapter 20 begins and ends on a very kind of a low note, so to speak. Chapter 20 verse 1 says, "And then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, unto the desert of Zin in the first month. And the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there." Okay, and so it makes mention of Moses' sister and how that she was buried at this time. She died at this time. Remember, she was older than Moses was at this point in time, and probably older than Aaron was too. I can't remember exactly the order there, but I'm guessing that she was the oldest. She was the one that followed Moses. Remember when Moses' mother put him in the ark of the bulrushes and put him down the river where Pharaoh's daughter found him. And from that point on, she was a helper to Moses. Whenever Moses started leading the children of Israel, she was right there. Sometimes she questioned Moses, but I think probably all in all, she was a help to him and to his ministry. And now we see that she has died in the desert of Zin, where the children of Israel spent a lengthy amount of time. Okay, and so that's where it starts. But then we also find out in the same area in verse 2, and there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. One of the things that you'll always notice and note about leadership, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a husband, whether you're a parent, whatever position that you are in, no matter what you may be going through personally, leadership is always needed. There's never really a downtime or vacation time. You never do really get to take a break. If you're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just the way that it is when you're in that position. If if you have a child that starts crying at 1 o'clock in the morning, you can't say you got to wait till in the morning. Okay, you may want to from time to time, but that's just not the case. You got to get up. You got to go and put your best foot forward and do the very best that you can. Moses just suffered the death of a sister, and I know that had to be pretty hard on him, as it is for all of us, right? When we lose a loved one, there's a certain amount of time that we would like to spend dealing with that, as it were. But there's no time like that. But you have to take this into consideration, I think, as you look at this passage. But God expects us to act a certain way as well, and to get past our feelings, get past the things that we're going through, and really be a Christian no matter what. Okay, so the children of Israel were facing the fact that they had no water. They gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Remember, Aaron, it was Aaron's sister too, and so he was going through the same thing. Maybe more so than Moses. Moses had been separated from Miriam for about 40 years, but Aaron, no doubt, had been with her the whole time, and so they were probably very close. I'm just guessing here, but I'm just, again, whenever I look at these passages, I like to think about, and I think the Bible puts it here for a reason, that that they were going through some hard times in themselves. But again, just keep that in mind as we look at this, okay? So there was no water there. This is not a new situation either, was it? We know back there in Exodus chapter 17, they kind of went through the same thing. God was able to bring them water from a rock. They had no reason to gather themselves against Moses and against Aaron. They needed to go to God with these things. They needed to trust in Him for the things that they needed. And it was very tough on them to get that through their heads, wasn't it? Is it hard for us as well? Is not sometimes our first action or reaction to a troubled time to start blaming or looking for reasons why, instead of going to God with the problem that we have? I find it in my own life many times that I start blaming someone else for my hard times, for the predicaments that I get into. I like to blame Kate for them more than anybody else, probably, because she's close by, But but anyway, and but we've talked about that, and I do ask for forgiveness usually afterwards. But I do tend to worry or bother her with my problems more than I bother God with them sometimes, and that's not right. It's not right to do. We need to bring God into these situations. And the people chode with Moses. All right, so they weren't just gathering themselves against him. They were also chiding with him or fighting with him about this. And it says, "Would God that we had died with our brethren when our brethren died before the Lord." So they're saying, we wish we would have died when all the other ones died there, and probably talking about the 14,000 that were killed earlier. And so they were really having a pretty good pity party here. Verse 4 says, "And why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into the wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there?" So they, again, fighting with him about the same old things. They just kept bringing up the same rebelliousness that they've always had. "And wherefore have you made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us in unto an evil place? It is no place of seed or of figs or of vines or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink." All right, so they're saying, you brought us to this place, you promised us a certain thing, but you're not delivering on this promise. And again, this is not new. This is stuff that they had been doing the whole time, which is the very reason that they were in the position that they were in. God had brought them to a land flowing with milk and honey, but they refused to go in. They were scared to go in. And so that's the reason why they were there. It wasn't anything to do with Moses. It wasn't anything to do with Aaron. It wasn't anything to do with God. It was everything to do with the choice that they made. How many times do we find ourselves in the same predicament? We're complaining about where we're at, and yet it was us that got us in that position to begin with. Boy, I mean, I see a lot of parallels here, don't you, with our own lives. And I think that's probably because it's biblical, right? A lot of application, even though it's thousands of years old. Unbelievable, isn't it? "And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them." All right, so where did they go with their problem? The very place that they needed to go. They went to the Lord with their problem, okay? And the Lord appeared to them. His glory came to them. And this shows, again, God's presence there with Moses and Aaron. "And the Lord spake to Moses, saying, Take the rod And gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts to drink. Okay, and so here we have the directions of God. Moses and Aaron went to God for direction. God gave them direction. He says, what I want you to do is take your rod down there, and I want you to go and speak to the rock. Okay, this is the same rod that Moses had held out years earlier over the Red Sea. This is the same rod that he struck the rock there in Exodus chapter 17. Water came forth. This is, this is nothing new that they were doing. This was something, except that God had given them new orders, and that was to speak to the rock. Okay, not to strike the rock or anything else, but to speak to it. He says, when you speak to it, then the water will come out. This is something that God does all the time. God changes things, all right? It's always God that does it, but God chooses the method in which that he does the things that he does. I've always been thankful to hear people's testimonies of how they came to the Lord. We all come through Jesus Christ. We all come through repentance and trusting him, but how we get there is different. I think about the miracles that Jesus did. Sometimes whenever he would heal the blind, he would touch them. Sometimes he would make mud pies and rub it on their eyes. He would do different things. And, everybody has a take on why he did the things the way he did them. But the fact is that to me, it makes it more interesting whenever God tells us to do different things and the result comes out the same. And that is that it's him that does it. He is the one that brings forth the water. It's not Moses. It's not Moses's rod. It is God that does these things, and he can tell you to strike it. He can tell you to speak to it. He can tell you to go out and dig a well. But it's always God that is the one that brings forth these things. And we need to have that in remembrance, that it's God that does it. I think this is something that Moses is about to forget, okay? That it's God that's doing this, not him. He is just the instrument by which God is speaking through. But the instrument is not the author of that, is not the Lord of, okay? And so that's where we have to really watch in being leaders, is that we belong to God. We are the under-shepherds. If you're a pastor of a church, you are the under-shepherd of God. God is the shepherd, or Jesus is the shepherd, whichever term you choose to use there, but it's God that is the head of the church, not the pastor, okay? And we have set orders to which we are to work with, whatever God tells us, and sometimes they're peculiar orders, and yet it's not us that's instrumental in this, it's God that's doing it through us, all right? I guess we're instrumental in doing it, but it's God that actually is the one that's blowing the instrument, so to speak, all right? So let's see. Verse 9 says, and Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. Okay, so Moses is starting off right. He took the rod just as God had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? So this shows Moses' spirit. Now, I can imagine him doing this, and I feel for him. I really do. Again, he just lost his sister. He's going through this grieving. Aaron's going through the grieving as well. Aaron doesn't say too much here, one way or the other, as usual. And I'm not sure that he could have talked Moses out of this or anything. But, he takes that rod up there and he gathers all the people together and he says, now you listen to me, you rebels. Do we need to get you water out of this rock? It shows, and again, what he does is he takes it on himself. When we take it on ourselves, the responsibility, the everything, then we are wrong. It's God that does it. It's God that works through us, okay? We are not responsible for what people do. As leaders, we're not responsible for what they do. We're responsible for how we act and how we obey. God's going to judge us based on our obedience, okay? Our stewardship. People may not like the way you preach something or the way you teach something. That's neither here nor there. I could care less. And you have to get to that point where what people think is nothing to you. We have to do what God tells us to do, okay? And sometimes that means that you got 5,000 people there, you preach a sermon, and then boom, there's 12 left. Hey, it won't be the first time in history that that's happened, right? Ask Jesus about that. He did that over there in John chapter 6, didn't he? After preaching a great message, but it was a tough message, but it was something that needed to be said to them. They were after Jesus about the food. And certainly there needed to be a good message preached here to these folks. But I'm going to tell you something. Sometimes we can go too far. We take it on ourselves. If we take it on ourselves, then that is being disobedient to God. And that's what we see here with Moses, okay, is that he was disobedient, and also it shows a lack of trust in God. And now look at this. Look what happens. It says in verse 11, Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beast also. Okay? Just because the Lord blesses doesn't mean the Lord's happy with it. That's also a pretty peculiar lesson, isn't it? But that's why I wanted to look at this, because it's pretty something. Because we think sometimes, well, if something good happens, it must be from God. Well, it did come from God. God sometimes uses our disobedience to get his will done. I'm not exactly sure why, except that later on you see that it says that God sanctified himself before the people because Moses didn't do it. All right? God was the one that is gaining the blessing here, not Moses. Moses is going to pay for what he's done here with this, and a very, very steep price that he's going to have to pay, because that he smote the rock instead of speaking to it. Okay, God told him to speak to it. Moses disobeyed God, and because of his disobedience, it's going to throw him out of a position of leadership. Look at this here. And this is really something. This has always stuck with me the whole time. It says in verse 12, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because you believed me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore ye shall not bring this congregation unto the land which I have given them. All right. Do you think, this is just a question between you and I, do you think for a moment that Moses did not believe that God could get water out of that rock? Do you think that's what he didn't believe? Not for a minute, right? We don't, because Moses had already seen God do it back there in Exodus chapter 17. He walks out and sees manna every day. He spoke to the Lord for 40 days on the mountaintop. He had seen the Red Sea parted. Moses had seen all of these things, and he knew what God's capability was. Now, last time we saw, or the time before, I can't remember which one it was, but whenever he called for the quail, he said, how are you going to be able to feed so many? But this is that type of question. You don't see Moses questioning whether God could do it. But what we have here is his disobedience or his disbelief here in God is that God could take care of these people in spite of their rebellion. Okay? And this happens, again, pretty frequently. Again, it says, verse 12, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because you believed me not. That's the reason why that God was dissatisfied with what Moses was doing. And to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. To sanctify means to set apart. You didn't set me apart as holy. You lumped me in with you and Aaron. And even though that I help you, and even though that you're the meekest man in the world, and even though that you've talked with me face to face, I'm still God, Moses. You are not God. Aaron is not God. You're representatives of God. And to show you this, to show the people what I think of this, you're going to have to pay dearly for this. Now, this almost doesn't seem right at first look. You think, well, the people were the ones that were being rebellious. They were chiding against Moses. They didn't go to God. They were the ones that were rebellious. Why is God punishing Moses for this? And the simple answer to that is that Moses was in a leadership position, and because of him being in that position, he was the face of God basically to the people. Okay, and whenever he decided that he was going to be disobedient to God and show the wrong picture here, that God has to say, you're going to have to step down from that position because everybody's looking at you. And I got to use you for an example. When we as leaders, whether we're, again, leaders as pastors, even teachers, all of those things, but especially pastors, deacons, God has set a set qualification standard for those positions in his churches. And whenever pastors fail to be able to carry out those qualifications the way that God sees, then it is required for them to step down and or the church to say no more, okay? Because of the position that they hold to. And this is a very tough thing, but leaders will be held to a higher standard, higher qualifications. It's the way that it is. If you want your family to do right, you can't be a dad that says, do what I say, but not as I do. You have to be someone that is leading by example. We need to be followers of God as dear children, as Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1 says. We need to be followers of him, okay? We need to be obedient. We can't ask our families to be obedient if we're not being obedient. And God is going to hold us to a higher standard when you put on the leadership breeches, then you need to hold them up, okay? You need to do what that calls for. And if you don't, God is going to come down harder on you than he will the rest of your family. You're going to be the one that's going to be the first to take the responsibility. Moses here was not going to be allowed to go into the land of promise because of this one action that Moses did, because of his rebellious spirit, his disobedient spirit, his unbelieving spirit in God. And when we get into that position, we need to be very careful, very aware of what we're doing. All right. And so the rest of the chapter deals with them trying to go into Edom and Edom not allowing them to go into the land. And then the very last verse of this chapter deals with Aaron and how that Aaron also died. So in this chapter it starts off with Miriam dying, we end with Aaron dying. And then we're going to get into, in the next lesson, the rest of the book of Numbers. So I hope you're ready for that. I'm preparing for that myself, and I hope to bring you that lesson very soon. All right, we'll see you later. Hopefully this helps you with chapter 20 of the book of Numbers. Sorry for missing that last week, guys. Hey, not perfect. But you already knew that, didn't you? All right, thanks a lot. See you next time.